Cool. Right, so welcome to our talk as part of Tech Week. Firstly, to introduce myself, I'm Lauren Skogstad. I'm the Experience Director here at Springload. And basically what that means is that I refine, lead and oversee our awesome human-centered design process. My background, I studied a Master's in Spatial Design and Architecture here at Massey University. And I've just come back home, well, I keep saying just, but it's actually been a year ago now. I moved home to Wellington to start working with Springload. So I've been with Springload for a year. And whilst working overseas, I was working for a company called Isobar as their Associate Design Director. So I got to work with some really cool companies like ANZ, Holden, Jetstar and Adairs. And in my 11 years experience, I've mainly been working in human-centered design, digital design and creative technologies.
My name's Matt. I'm a technical director here at Springload. That means I can work with the tech team to deliver all of the cool stuff we're going to be taking you through a bit today. I've been working in digital agencies all of my career, either in London or here in Wellington. I've worked for companies like Google, Rolex, Toyota and Headspace, focusing mainly on kind of new and emerging technologies and creative ways of using them.
Cool, yeah. So welcome to our talk, which is on how might we design for emerging technologies while keeping customers at the heart. So also a big welcome to you guys to Springload. This is Springload, our office, level 6. Upstairs is where all our desks and stuff are, and this is kind of our lunch area actually. We're a digital agency. We've recently merged with a company called TouchTech, which makes us the largest independently owned digital agency in Wellington. We work with some pretty cool clients, so ACC, New Zealand Customs, CLIM, and recently the Ministry of Education. And we've been increasingly working with emerging technologies such as voice, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, which has been providing some really interesting challenges, which now forms the basis of our talk today. So, just to run through what we're going to do, we're going to first introduce, Matt's going to talk you through what emerging technologies and a bit of an introduction to that. Then I'm going to give you a really short introduction to human-centered design, and then we'll get into the bulk of the talk, the juicy, cool bit, which is our approach, and then we'll leave some time for questions and discussion, hopefully.
And drinks and cheese balls.
And drinks and cheese. Yeah, have drinks and cheese.
Okay, so like Lauren says, to kick things off, just want to kind of cover a few terms, because there's some terms that can need a bit of definition in this sort of conversation. So, what do we mean by emerging technologies? Whether something is emerging is typically a sort of matter of opinion or context. Something like machine learning is going to be kind of business as usual and day-to-day, somewhere like Google. But at more traditional companies or at government agencies, it's going to be very kind of the moment and emerging and very brand new. So for the context of this talk, the way we look at emerging technologies are technologies that are still in their infancy in terms of sort of figuring them out and establishing the rules and patterns of how to design an experience with them. And to give some really good examples of that, this is a quote from Nicole Hay about voice. And the really great part of this and how it sums it up is at the end where she says, the rules haven't totally been written and it's kind of a mess. And that kind of sums it up nicely in that people are doing things with these technologies, but the best practices and the ways of working are still kind of being iterated on and kind of worked through. And she compares voice to the web in 1996. Who can remember the web in 1996? It looked like this. So this was apple.com in actually 97. Google.com didn't exist in those days. If you wanted to search, you would have used Yahoo or Lycos. You were probably browsing using Netscape Navigator on a 56k modem, made that awful sound, using a screen that was kind of 640 by 480. So that's a long way away from where we are today. Macromedia Flash was released in 1996 as well, and shortly after that we got lots of websites with kind of preloaders and skip intro buttons, and people were sort of exploring, what is this medium? Do we create intros and lots of animation like a TV show? or do we have kind of online documents like the web is more today? And that's a nice example of sort of figuring out the technology. In 2004, sort of a few years later, there was kind of Web 2.0 became a term. That was more user-generated content and kind of nicer usability. But this was very much kind of Web 1.0. The tech, the hardware even was still kind of really new, 56K modems, for example, and the best practices of how to design an experience and the sorts of experiences were still being figured out. And coming back to kind of the modern day from 1996, this is Josh Lovejoy, who used to work on AI at Google, and he's kind of explaining how AI is that kind of emerging technology of the moment. Thinking about the user experience of AI and how it's not quite figured out yet, and it needs that multidisciplinary collaboration to kind of help figure that out. We'll get onto that a bit more today. So yeah, AI, machine learning, that's kind of the hot emerging technology of the moment. Much discussed because of its sort of wider ethical and broader challenges, and often misunderstood a little as well. So we just wanted to clarify a few concepts there too. We'll be using the term AI a lot, and it's a very broad, kind of vague term, but when we're kind of using it, we're kind of using it to represent everything within that sort of field. So data science, machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, as well as maybe even specific kind of use cases, things like recommendation engines, for example. Within AI, a really important thing to kind of clarify up front is that there's generally two different types of AI. There's narrow AI, which focuses on one specific task. It's used for things like language translation, image recognition, and typically making predictions based on patterns. And then there's general AI, which kind of reasons, plans, and could be said to have consciousness. You'll notice that all of the examples for general AI are fictional, and that's because we're nowhere near having that yet. All AI we're going to talk about today is kind of very much things you can use at the moment, so very much narrow AI. And that's a really kind of key element of the talk, in that kind of narrow AI is good at one specific thing. So that means you've got to be very careful about how you design an experience with it. You can't assume it can reason about things like HAL or Terminator. So that's an idea of what we're talking about. And yeah, working with these technologies requires sort of careful consideration about how you approach them. And with the kind of the pace of change of these technologies kind of ramping up and almost becoming exponential, working with them carefully and considerately is kind of a skill that's going to become more and more important. So the sorts of questions we're asking are, how might we sidestep and see through the hype to see the technologies simply as tools? How might we reduce the learning curve of working with these technologies? And how can we work to understand the challenges whilst capitalizing on the opportunities to deliver great experiences? And kind of the base of how we're approaching that at Springload is to use a human-centered design approach, which Lauren's going to talk us through now.
Cool. So hands up, who's heard of human-centered design? Yes. Woo. And who's worked on a project that uses that methodology? Okay, cool. So human-centered design, I mean, I can tell by the room, you've all heard of it. It's about involving the people that we're designing for at every step of the way. And so by starting with people, we create innovative solutions that are tailored to meet their needs. So the people at IDEO say, when you understand the people you're designing for and you design from their perspective, not only do you discover unexpected outcomes, but you come up with ideas that people will embrace. So because you've heard of human-centered design, you've probably seen this diagram, but this is at the heart of it. So there's three things: finding proof of desire, finding if something is ensuring things are technologically viable, technologically feasible, and then making sure that it's viable as well. So at Springload, we talk about, how can we find our proof of desire? So do people want this crazy new technology? Does it actually meet their needs? Is it the right solution that's going to help them in their day-to-day lives? When we think about technology being feasible, we're thinking about, what are the limitations of the technology that we're designing for, and then what are the opportunities as well. We'll get into that a little bit more in the talk. And then viable is not just about delivering projects that are on time and on budget, but also delivering real business value to see a return on investment. And also to think about how we might support that technology moving forward, because a lot of new things that we create actually need ongoing support within the business. So with emerging technology, we recommend that you use the same methodology that you would designing any digital product, like a website, and ensure that you design with people at every step of the way. But as we said at the beginning, what is the best way of going about doing that for emerging technologies? And so we've put together the following approach. So our approach is basically broken down into 5 sections, which we're going to take you through now. So collaboration, define the motivation, design for people, design the approach, and prototype and test. And design the approach and prototype and test, definitely the cool sections. So first off, multidisciplinary collaboration. So if you've worked on a website project, you've probably heard everyone say, we've got to collaborate together. So there's project methodologies like Agile that set up cross-functional teams. And with emerging technologies, this is more important than ever. You have to set up cross-functional teams. So I'm talking about having designers and developers, the business, content people, everyone are all involved together to design this product. And this is because the design team may not understand the new technology or even used it themselves. And so they need to understand the opportunities and the limitations of the design. And for tech, the new technology may not have ever been used before. So we need to consider how people are going to respond to this new technology and consider some of the social or cultural impacts that might happen. And so if we ensure that everyone understands the mechanics of how the technology works, then we can figure out some of those potential impacts. So, for example, as part of Experience Week, it's the last time we did this talk, we created a prototype for ACC, which is a voice prototype. And basically, ACC just wanted to experiment with using Google Home as a way of kind of someone finding out, getting help for their injury, So basically, the idea was you could just ask a Google Home, hey, I've injured my ankle, can you get me some help? And see if that would be a really helpful thing to do. And so we set up a 5-day design sprint for that to create a proof of concept. And at the end, we had a working Google Home that you can actually use. And in that design sprint, we had a front-end developer, a senior experienced designer, and a client. And they were all working together collaboratively to build this thing. And so, some of the things that we came up with on the project were things like, we realized the best way to use voice is when it feels like a shortcut and it feels quicker than with something that you would do on your phone on a screen. So if you think about something like setting up an appointment where you've got to open a browser, open a calendar, create the event, click title, click date, choose date. With voice, you can say that all in one sentence. So then it feels like a real benefit to do it through voice. So, define the motivation.
Yeah. So this is something that can be a bit delicate on some projects, but we find that kind of acknowledging this and discussing it as a team, moving forward with it, can be really useful. Human-centered design typically comes from a place where you would start with the user and you would identify a problem that you want to solve, and then you would kind of explore that problem and then design a solution for that. And the technology would come fairly a far way down the line. Often we have people come to us and say, we want a chatbot, or we want something in VR, or we want AI. And they're starting very much with the technology. And human-centered design might not be used to that, but we find it's absolutely fine to work that way. If the motivation is to use some cutting-edge technology and kind of get innovation points in the community or with your users, that's a great thing. But actually aligning behind that and moving forward with it can help the project be a success, rather than that being kind of the elephant in the room. Now, examples of this could have pretty much been any chatbot, but this is ANZ's Jamie chatbot, which is a great example of a chatbot, essentially. They use kind of Soul Machines technology for this. It's not a project we were involved with, by the way. But it's a really good kind of example of a great chatbot. From what I've read, the MVP that they've created is something that they're looking to build on and work with. And you could imagine this kind of changing how users interact with their bank. Now, the MVP in the short term is answering questions from their FAQ page. And you could imagine that kind of reverse engineering a problem statement from this could be, how might we improve the usability of our FAQ page? Now that could lead you off on a project where you implement this, but in a very different way to saying, how might we appear as the most innovative, cutting-edge bank, delivering experiences that other banks aren't to our customers? And actually seeing that as the kind of driving force of the project, acknowledging that as a team, and kind of driving the project forward in that way, will lead you to a far better place that hits your goals than trying to kind of go back and figure out and start with a problem. So that's something we see quite often, but the challenge when you kind of come at something tech first is to figure out the right problem to solve. An example of this is we worked for a government agency recently, and they said to us, we want a shiny thing. That was their words. And they'd already settled on a voice assistant, and they wanted this to help them open up other opportunities and a bigger piece of work, get them funding for something else. So we said, okay, that's fine, let's move forward with that. Let's think of what voice is good for, kind of the things Laura mentioned earlier. And let's explore the technology a little bit. And then let's find the content and the use cases that you as an agency, as an organization have that works really well for voice. Kind of reverse engineer the problem from that technology. The trouble is, sometimes finding that right problem for the technology can be really hard, especially with emerging technologies. How many people have seen this before? This is the hype cycle. A couple, okay. That means I get to talk about the great names of the phases, which is awesome. So this maps the expectations of a technology over time. There's 5 phases which have great names, like I say. It starts with an innovation trigger, down in the bottom left here. And that's when something kind of breaks through and starts getting a bit of momentum. Then you quickly reach the peak of inflated expectations. And that's where kind of expectations are super high. If you're a startup, you're probably trying to crowbar this technology into your product so that people will invest in you. It's kind of very hot and of the moment. But then pretty quickly you enter the trough of disillusionment, and where people realize that you can't use this for everything. Oh, is it as good as people were saying? Maybe it's actually terrible. And then you make your way up the slope of enlightenment, where actually you realize that, oh no, this is kind of useful for some things. And then finally you reach the plateau of productivity, where actually there's just some good use cases for this technology, people have the right expectations, and you can just kind of move forward business as usual. So the key here is it's super important to research kind of a technology and truly understand it, as well as having that multidisciplinary collaboration that Lauren was talking about, so that you can identify the right use case for a technology. The way I look at this is it kind of maps out the number of expected use cases for some technology, whereas at the peak, you're thinking this will be great for everything. And by the end, you've kind of gone, these are the things it's good at. And as kind of professionals working with these technologies, we want to try and skip that peak and that trough and figure out those great use cases. What is voice good for? Okay, let's design, even if we're saying we want to build something with voice, let's figure out the use case that's going to work and build the right use case, rather than just jumping on the bandwagon, building the first thing that comes to mind, and kind of pretty quickly after releasing it, fall down that trough of disillusionment. Great names.
Great names. Yeah, so obviously the other approach is to come up with the problem first and then find the right tech for your problem. So I guess it was funny when Matt and I were kind of talking about this section, I was a bit nervous about having this tech first thing. I was like, oh, but it's not human-centered design. But I think our point being is, be honest about where you're coming from with this emerging technology and how you want to go about it. But there are still great more examples of people who do come at it from problem first. And the one that I wanted to touch on was the Health Promotion Agency, they came to us basically saying, we want to come up with a way to be more personalised with our audience. So the Health Promotion Agency, if you haven't heard of them before, they basically do big campaigns to quit smoking or quit drinking or do less gambling. Do less gambling, don't gamble.
Gamble responsibly.
Gamble responsibly. And so, a lot of what they do is these massive campaigns. And so they said to us, could we use some kind of digital technology to have a more personable conversation with someone, a more one-on-one conversation? And so that was where we started. We didn't know what technology we were going to use. We didn't even know what we were going to try to solve, but we just knew that we were going to try and have a more one-on-one conversation. Cool. So our next thing is to design for people. So whether you've decided to start off thinking about it from the tech first, or you've got your problem first, you should always do research with people. And so I guess, you should do all the same things that you would normally do on like a normal web design project. So you should do all the contextual inquiries, interviews, deep hangouts, surveys, reading customer support tickets, log analysis, to figure out the problem that you're trying to solve and address an understated human need that people have. Because what we found really interesting is that some people think that machine learning will somehow magically figure out the problems that we should be solving. That somehow that emerging technology just kind of, we'll just build the bot and then the bot will just know what to do. It's fine. But that's definitely not the case. We still need to figure out those things, and we still need to go out and talk to people. Artificial intelligence and machine learning and emerging tech will not know how to solve those problems. So a couple of examples, and Matt was talking about this one a little bit before, but basically around, using like a voice application or something. It was a government agency that we were working with, and they wanted to create this shiny thing. And so the way that we approached that was basically by mapping out all the services that this government agency covered. We went, okay, so here are all the different services. What would be a service, or what would be an aspect that would help for voice? And so we thought, well, okay, maybe you're driving to the airport and you've forgotten your passport. There's an idea. Or, what about mums with kids? We've got hands full, and maybe they could use some kind of voice interface. So yeah, that could work. And then we went out and did some research, and what we discovered was that we discovered a really interesting insight, and it came from one of our participants, where she was basically saying that, with a voice interface, what I could do was, so she doesn't want to appear like she's on her phone all the time to her 4-year-old son. So when she's on her phone, she's saying, I'm chatting to your dad. But instead of having that screen there, she could have this voice interface, which is a lot more, she's really taking that screen away and then just interacting with a voice interface as opposed to using a screen all the time. Because you know how kids get, they see you on the screen, they're like, oh, look at the screen, and then you're like, God damn it, get the phone off them. But so, yeah, I guess that was kind of a really interesting insight as to why mums might want to actually use a voice interface. And then also back to the ACC voice prototype that we did, proof of concept, we were also trying to think about how might we design a tone of voice that is empathetic yet sincere. So one of the things we were thinking about was we need to make sure that the machine understands the injured person's point of view and where they're coming from and respond accordingly. So we need to be really careful not to make the voice sound human-like, because it's not human. So it's important to acknowledge users that they're talking to a machine and then design accordingly. So for example, we found in user testing when the machine goes, "Oh, I'm very sorry to hear that you're injured." It's like, it's weird. Machine's not sorry. Machines aren't sorry. It's a weird thing for a machine to say. So we had to change the tone of voice and change what the machine was saying so that it felt natural and normal to be talking to this machine about your injury.
Okay. So this, like I said, is the kind of biggest section of the talk. Every project you're going to work on or kind of be involved with or hear about is going to be pretty unique. But this section kind of has a bunch of tips, examples that we feel illustrate kind of interesting ways to approach things or things to think about or consider. So the first tip is that you need to guide the intelligence. Now this one's pretty specific to AI. It's essentially that you need to kind of teach the AI rather than just throw data at it. A really good example of this is a story that came out of Google about their product, Google Clips. Has anyone got one of these? Oh, I really want to hear from someone who's actually used it. Basically, it's a camera that takes photos for you. So we've had kind of machines taking photos for decades, kind of digital point-and-shoot cameras. But this is something you don't need to point or even shoot. You kind of pop it somewhere or attach it to you, and it's kind of running all the time, and then it will just select the best photos and images from that period and say, hey, these are your photos. So basically a machine that isn't just a camera, but it's being a photographer. Now, in terms of figuring out how to kind of create an AI, a machine learning model that will establish what photos to capture, Google thought, okay, we're going to speak to some photographers, we're going to find some great photos, we're going to show those great photos to the model, and then we'll be able to run all sorts of kind of video feeds through the model, and it'll just choose great photos. It didn't quite work like that. They found they really had to break kind of the problem and kind of break photos down to quite kind of reductionist kind of framings. And there's a great quote from one of the designers. They said, the idea that there's some singular intelligence that understands all things and can generalize and transfer knowledge from context to context, nope, not even close. So the AI kind of wouldn't understand the context and the nuance between what makes one photo great compared to another. So this is something we often see where a complex problem, the hype of AI, those kind of peak of inflated expectations, make people think, the AI will be able to solve that. It's not a problem we have to worry about. When there's a hard problem and there's this magic-like intelligence, let's let that solve it. But really, that magic-like intelligence, when it comes to products that Google make, is often just great design. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but kind of the way I like to look at this is you can't rely on a god from the machine. There's this idea of something called Deus ex machina, I think. My Latin's a bit rusty. Has anyone heard of this? Yeah, so this is kind of a criticized plot device, almost seen as an easy way out. It's kind of any improbable or overly convenient solution in sort of a narrative. You could say the bacteria killing the aliens in War of the Worlds was this kind of solution that came from nowhere, saved the day. It's seen as a god from the machine. Same as the Great Eagles in Lord of the Rings. And there's even a parody in The Life of Brian where a spaceship comes and rescues Brian. And where God from the Machine comes from is that in ancient Greece, they would have kind of winches and pulleys and lower someone down from above as a god to kind of come in and decree a solution and then kind of Finn kind of play over. And kind of using this to represent that you can't rely on kind of intelligence coming from the machine to kind of come in quickly and solve those hard problems. you're going to have to figure those out yourself. You can't just throw data at AI and expect it to figure things out. It's up to you. So what did the Google Clips team do? They started going even further. They kind of taught them their model or models all sorts of different ways to look at a bad photo. When Google Clips was in your pocket, when your finger's in front of the lens, differentiating at the bottom here whether someone's in the center of the frame or off to the side. Quick and shaky movements, sharpness versus blurriness. How familiar someone in the photo is to you, whether they're someone you've taken a lot of photos of. Capturing photos fairly often, but not all the time. Getting a nice visual diversity to the photos, and kind of a diversity of the people in them as well. So they put all of this effort into bad photos, good photos, breaking them down into various qualities. And even then, the design team behind it said it was important to recognize the amount of nuance, aesthetic instincts, and personal history that we often take for granted when evaluating the quality of our photos and videos. So they're kind of saying, well, we can do this, it's going to take some good pictures, but it's not going to be good as a human. And it kind of got mixed reviews. This is why I was keen to know if anyone had one. Wired gave it 8 out of 10, which is pretty good. But The Verge and Mashable gave it 5 out of 10. And Mashable even said, AI is not ready to be your photographer. Avoid this pricey AI experiment at all costs. Kind of a bit of a damning review. So yeah, it's really important to kind of guide the intelligence, do what you can, rather than expecting it to solve your problems. Next up is designing to kind of complement and augment users. Now, when designing how you'll approach a project, it's important to remember that AI isn't a match for humans in many ways, like we've just seen. AI is very good at doing one thing, narrow AI, like we talked about. Machine learning makes predictions, but it can often be wrong. So it's important to use AI for what it's good for, looking through large data sets, recognizing patterns, making predictions, and using humans for what they're good for: context, insight, and nuance. And considering how to design an experience to bring those strengths together is the key. So balancing how much to automate and how much to augment is a key balance. It's quite easy often to think, oh, we're going to automate everything and do everything for a user because we've got this intelligence and we can do these things. But actually, the great experiences often come from augmenting and providing functionality for a user to use themselves. So some really good examples of this are the few we have here. So starting off back in the 90s again, 97, this is Gary Kasparov, a chess grandmaster, losing to IBM's Deep Blue. It's the first kind of case of machine beating human at chess. Now after that, Kasparov must have been feeling pretty down. He invented something called centaur chess. So centaurs are the idea of a kind of a half horse, half human kind of character from fiction. And in this case, it's the idea of humans and a machine teaming up together. And in 2005, in a centaur chess tournament, a human working with AI, a machine, beats just a machine. So why was that? It turns out that whilst machines are really good at seeing forwards millions of moves, that kind of balancing that with a long-term chess strategy is something they're not too good at, or not as good as a human, essentially. Interestingly, you didn't even need that powerful machines. A human with a pretty regular laptop like this could actually beat a supercomputer on its own. Even more interestingly, the process of how the human and the machine work together was kind of the key part of the puzzle. A low-skilled chess player working with a better process to work with a machine was better than a highly skilled chess player working with a machine in a kind of unoptimized, inefficient way. So that shows that designing an experience to really play to the strengths of the human and the machine and focusing on how they come together can really make a difference in how successful technologies and projects you build with them are. We've got a few other examples that are a bit more relatable than centaur chess. So on the left here, we've got something called Hemingway. This is an app that will help you with your writing. Now, a review of this said, it's a terrible idea to accept all of its recommendations. It frequently misunderstands context and proposes changes that would alter the underlying meaning of sentences. Overall, though, it's a handy tool that can help writers do their jobs better. So a key decision that must have been made during the development of this product was, are we going to automate this? Is the user going to write kind of their copy, press a button, and then get our improved version? Or are we going to kind of subtly show various hints and recommendations and augment the user's ability, show them things they might not have thought of, but leave the control and the context and the insight and that nuance to the user? And how they've presented those recommendations has been key to kind of the success of that app. On the right here, we've got someone called Taryn Southern, who, according to the Digital Trends website, her new album is produced entirely by AI. And this is something we see quite often. It's kind of fuels this idea of kind of the God from the machine, this idea of seeing press stories of, something created entirely by AI. It's almost like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy scene, where you go to a machine, you ask it a question, you come back millions of years later and it goes, here's the answer, 42. What actually happened here was Taryn Southern chose a genre, she chose a tempo and a key, and she got given, say, 20 examples of a possible song. She went, these are all pretty bad, but that shows a bit of promise. I'll take that, I'll tweak it a bit myself, and then feed it back into the model, get 20 more versions, and then take that, tweak it a bit myself, kind of rinse and repeat that, keep going, and got to the point where she had something she was happy with. Now, who's created that album? It's kind of hard to say. She's gone from sort of pure composer, creating everything herself, to sort of part composer, part editor, working alongside the machine. The goal there wasn't for the AI to create great music, but was to create inspiration and help augment her kind of inspirational skills, but leave kind of the, again, context, the nuance, the creativity to her. Now, I'd never heard of Taryn Southern apart from this story, but there's a quote where she says, "It may make a lot of bad suggestions, but it also sometimes makes exciting and original ones that push a songwriter into new territory." To give some context to her saying it may make some bad suggestions, she's written 2 songs, one called Where's My Goat? And one called I Think I Farted. So I think those kind of bad suggestions, it must have been pretty bad. And then finally we've got one here that I imagine most people have seen. This is now in Google Inbox and Google Mail, Gmail. And it's their system for kind of auto replies. Now, Google's obviously got probably one of the biggest AI teams in the world, all sorts of computing power, and yet they don't try and write your emails for you. They don't try and say, look, we've got an assistant that's going to respond to your emails, you can take the afternoon off. They say,
if only.
If only. They say, okay, we've read your email, we kind of get what's going on, and we think we can augment your kind of replying to them by showing a few suggestions, kind of opposites often here, yes I can, no I can't, and can provide a way for you to quickly start that email, but give you the ability to edit it, tweak it, and then move on. So to sum this all up, making sure to kind of design to complement users and kind of augment their abilities and play to a human and a machine's strength is key.
So our next tip is that data is part of the design process, and I've got a short clip to show you guys. I hope it works, Matt.
I really do too.
Great.
I think this is over here.
Yeah.
Let's play a game.
Here we go.
Close your eyes and picture a shoe. Okay, did anyone picture this? This? How about this? We may not even know why, but each of us is biased toward one shoe over the others. Now imagine that you're trying to teach a computer to recognize a shoe. You may end up exposing it to your own bias. That's how bias happens in machine learning. But first, what is machine learning? Well, it's used in a lot of technology we use today. Machine learning helps us get from place to place, gives us suggestions, translates stuff, even understands what you say to it. How does it work? With traditional programming, people hand code the solution to a problem, step by step. With machine learning, computers learn the solution by finding patterns in data. so it's easy to think there's no human bias in that. But just because something is based on data doesn't automatically make it neutral. Even with good intentions, it's impossible to separate ourselves from our own human biases. So our human biases become part of the technology we create in many different ways. There's interaction bias, like this recent game where people were asked to draw shoes for the computer. Most people drew ones like this. So as more people interacted with the game, the computer didn't even recognize these. Latent bias. For example, if you were training a computer on what a physicist looks like, and you're using pictures of past physicists, your algorithm will end up with a latent bias, skewing towards men. And selection bias. Say you're training a model to recognize faces. Whether you grab images from the internet or your own photo library, are you making sure to select photos that represent everyone? Since some of our most advanced products use machine learning, we've been working to prevent that technology from perpetuating negative human bias. From tackling offensive or clearly misleading information from appearing at the top of your search results page, to adding a feedback tool in the search bar so people can flag hateful or inappropriate autocomplete suggestions. It's a complex issue and there's no magic bullet, but it starts with all of us being aware of it so we can all be part of the conversation. Because technology should work for everyone. Let's play Hey, Did Anyone Picture This?
Oh, that's not what I want you to do. Next.
There we go.
Yay. So, artificial intelligence and the science of is the science of making predictions based on patterns and relationships in data. Therefore, artificial intelligence and machine learning is fueled by and mediated by human judgment. So data is not neutral. And I've got a really great example of this where some researchers at the Cornell University discovered that 33% more of language around cooking involves women over men. But then when they trained, the model that they trained amplified this disparity to 68%. So not only is there bias within the data, but then the model itself is then amplifying that bias even further because it's looking for patterns within the data. So we need to consider how artificial intelligence could amplify bias and understand that data is not neutral. Another thing for us to think about with data when we're capturing it is to consider how we use that data. So, for example, with ACC, we needed to make some conscious decisions about that. So, for example, how comfortable would people be with sharing their health data with a Google Assistant? It's an extremely important part of the design process and an important consideration. I'm sure you've kind of found like sometimes on the internet where a website just suddenly somehow knows your location, they know your age, and they know your email address, and you're going, hang on a minute, how did you know that information? And it becomes a bit uncanny or uncomfortable, and so we just need to be really cautious about how we use people's data. We've got another really great example.
Yeah, so this one's from a couple of years ago, not the 90s this time. And remember, this was before kind of Cambridge Analytica and kind of big kind of events like that in the world of privacy and security. And this is kind of a very small part of a kind of data visualization that a company called Strava did. It was kind of their end-of-year project. They wanted to showcase how great they were, how many people used their platform so they could attract more users. Now, Strava tracks various GPS activities. So if you're going for runs, cycling, even things like windsurfing or ice skating, you install Strava on your phone, pop it in your pocket, and it will track where you go, and you can use that to see how fast you've gone, where you've gone. And so they released this kind of visualization where you could see everyone around the world and where they've gone with Strava and what they've done. Kind of really popular walking routes or marathons or kind of swimming circuits were kind of highlighted brightly, and it was a really kind of cool thing to look around. But there was one thing they didn't expect. Now, I can imagine working on this project myself and going, oh, this is awesome, with all the data is anonymous, we're just going to put it out there, it's fantastic. But they found that in places like Afghanistan, the main people using this app were people from the American military. Now, obviously, they weren't going for a run in the hills, they were running circuits around the base. And so these kind of secret military locations, which were typically removed from things like Google Maps, were highlighted in this kind of bright orange in the middle of nowhere with no other activity. Super easy to see, people go, what's that? You can kind of put two and two together. And this is a really good example of the sort of thing that you might not think about when designing projects. You think, oh, the data's anonymous, we're just showing people running around Wellington, around Mount Vic. But actually, when you're at that scale with that sort of data, you're really careful about what you do with it and how you think about it. Okay, so the next tip is really considering how to build trust and increase understanding with kind of emerging technologies. An app's often got to prove to you that it's quite good before you'll use it often. And on the flip side, if an experience claims to be powered by AI, people can sometimes expect too much as well and expect it to be perfect. I've got a couple of really good examples of ways to kind of combat that. So on the left here is probably something that everybody's used, Google Maps. And this is a really subtle feature, but the way it shows you kind of possible routes and directions helps build trust with you. So here it's kind of showing how to get from Brooklyn to the airport. And you can imagine that if it just shows you that main route in blue and you were stuck in that traffic in Newtown, you might be thinking, it probably would have been quicker if I'd gone down the motorway. Down kind of State Highway 1, through town, skipped all the traffic lights, and it would have been fine. And you might have kind of got to the airport late for your flight and thought, I don't trust Google, I'm late, maybe another approach would have been better. But here they kind of acknowledge, yeah, there's traffic in Newtown, there are these other approaches, but we're pretty sure they're going to be slower for you. And that kind of shows you how they work, the sorts of things they're considering, and helps build that trust with you, and kind of teach you what the app's doing in the background. It also shows more than one option. If you're not in a rush for your flight, personally, I would go around the south coast, it's a minute slower, and it's a lot nicer drive at the end of the day. So showing you that kind of gives you the flexibility and helps build trust that Google's going to give you those options. Without wanting to be too biased towards Google, this is another Google example. Yeah. This is from Google Clips. This is part of the app that sits alongside the camera. And this is a GIF kind of showing someone toggling between their 11 suggested moments, the shots that they think are best, and the 62 moments that it captured. Now, this is an example of them kind of showing, okay, we think that these 11 are pretty good, but we might have missed something that you really like. That kind of human nuance, that kind of aesthetic kind of ability that the machine might not have. It's a way to give that control to the user, whilst also showing kind of, okay, these are the sorts of things we're going to capture, and you can trust us to capture these sorts of interesting moments, and building that trust and understanding.
Cool. So the last tip of the section is basically to use human-centered design for every choice and every decision. So when you're designing the system, when you're training the system, when you're providing feedback to the system, when you're evaluating the data, and what happens when the system errors, it's important for us to think about how we interact with those moments every step of the way. So our last and final section of the approach is prototype and test. Because one of the biggest challenges with emerging technologies is how the hell do you prototype something like that? And I guess one of the things we really want to make a point of is that you don't have to completely build the technology in order to prototype it. Just like with other human-centered design projects, you can fake it till you make it. And so, believe it or not, they've actually come up with the Wizard of Oz technique, where a team member is basically simulating the responses from the system. It's probably one of our favourites. Second favourite. So an example of doing this would be like with a chat. So if you're trying to test a chatbot, you could just have someone in the room with their phone and they're looking at the responses, and then someone else who's just texting back. So they're just texting, and that's all you're doing, and you're just texting the script of the chatbot. And with something like that, you can find out what feels funny or what feels weird, and you can really refine your script for your chatbot through something as basic as just texting the user. Or you could flex out your acting skills and pretend to be Alexa. So we actually have someone in our office called Alexa. We don't always make her do this stuff of testing. Anybody can do this stuff of testing. But yeah, you can fake being Alexa. And one of the ways that we did that with the ACC was we built this little platform and then made like a little picture. There's Google Home. And we could actually, in the simulation, the participant can actually hear the actual voice of the Google Home. But behind the scenes is Kanika on a computer where she's basically just controlling the responses of the system. So before we've even built it, we can fake it and see how things feel. It's even better, more faking.
Yeah. So driverless cars are still quite a way off, and it's kind of very much an emerging technology or a group of emerging technologies. And people are starting to think of, okay, how do we test how people interact with these driverless cars? How does it feel to be a passenger? How does it feel to be a cyclist next to them, or someone in another car, or even a pedestrian? If you think of crossing the road or walking down the street, you might make eye contact with the driver, they might gesture to you to move forwards across the road. How do you do that with a driverless car? How do you know it's safe to cross? And how do you test that when you can't legally have a driverless car on the road? So people have a few ideas of how to solve this problem. These people have taken what I like to call just strap a screen to the roof approach, trying to show these people that it's safe to cross. This is a Mercedes example where they've gone slightly cooler and they project a crossing on the kind of road in front of you, going, okay, you may cross. The robots have decreed you can cross. This is an example from a Swedish firm called Semcon. They've photoshopped in someone sleeping in an eye mask, which is hilarious. But the main thing is they've put a smiley face on the car that's telling us safe to cross. And then there was Total Recall in the 90s and something called the Johnny Cab, which was kind of an android, a robot in the front of the car pretending to be a human and giving you that something to make eye contact with. Now the challenge here is you could build an expensive car with a screen in the kind of front, or you could build something like this, but as Lauren says, that's going to take a lot of time, and how do you even know that's the right approach? How do you test that without going to the lengths of doing this? And this is, I think, the best slide in the presentation. This is from a Ford-funded study, and Google have done the same thing. They essentially dressed someone up as a car seat. So this is someone sat there putting what looks like a car seat on in front of him, what looks like a car headrest, hat on top of his head. He's going to drive the car with his hands kind of covered in gloves and kind of below the dashboard. And you can imagine seeing that driving on the street, you go, holy shit, there's driverless cars in Wellington. And you would kind of be there crossing the street and you go, oh, can I cross? And he's kind of got instructions to maybe drive a little bit aggressively and drive fast and suddenly stop or nudge forward and see how the pedestrian reacts to what they perceive as a driverless car. To test those interactions and see what works. See if it would help to put a screen with a smiley face on front, or if actually they just need the car to go really slowly. But this is a really great way to show that quite low-fi solutions can help you test these things quite quickly. You don't need to wait for someone to set up your chatbot or to build your driverless car, dress someone as a car seat, and you can figure things out much, much more easily. So, to review.
Cool, so this is our approach. So here are the 5 stages. The first one, collaboration. So make sure that you've got a multidisciplinary team working on this so that everyone can understand the mechanics of the system and the limitations and the opportunities. Multidisciplinary teams are going to create way better emerging technologies. The second thing is define your motivation. So are you going to decide that your approach is, I want to look really innovative with this cool new chatbot, or is your goal to actually solve a real human need? Both motivations are totally fine. Just be honest about what your motivation is and be upfront with your team. And then the next one is design for people. So the clue's in the name. Just with any other human-centered design project, find that real human need. Talk with the people to uncover how this technology would really support them in their day-to-day lives, because the last thing you want to do is create an undesirable product.
And then there's design the approach. That was kind of take classic HCD approaches. Don't rely on God from a machine. Augment and complement your users rather than just automating them away. Consider data as part of the design process and be considerate and careful with how you use it. Consider how to build trust and increase understanding in what's happening behind the scenes for your users. Then prototype and test. Fake it till you make it, Wizard of Oz testing. Use a messaging app for a chatbot. Use someone on the phone to test an Alexa app. Dress up as a car seat if you want. Anything that works.
Cool. So to sum up, in light of designing for emerging technologies, the Google Clips team says that if you're not aligned to a real human need, you're just going to end up building a very powerful system to address perhaps a very small or perhaps non-existent problem. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So we covered quite a lot. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, go for it.
How do you sort of approach ethical problems? Because I work in the chatbot space, and one of the issues I have with that digital human is that they're often women. So it perpetuates negative stereotypes. And it's not just about women, there's lots of other ones that we might not be conscious of. And I find with a lot of people in this space, they're like, we care about this problem, we don't know what to do about it. Or you have the other people that are saying, that's the lawyer's problem, it's not ours. It's true, it happens. So how do you sort of approach that and have those conversations? Because there's a lot of people that don't really get it as a thing. Is that something that you've had to tackle?
That's a very tough thing to tackle, yeah. It's not something that we've had specifically. And I think speaking to the users, the community, seeing their views on it, it might be very different in some fields or some use cases than others. I think if possible, give users the option, perhaps. That could be interesting if you think.
Oh, I mean, how do you solve that problem with like the decision makers from the business and stuff?
Okay.
Yeah. So not the users, the other way, the people that make the decisions.
Even harder question.
Yeah, I guess I find, so in that, like I say, with like that chatbot, like that's always a female, I would use like some usability testing and some insights from that. I mean, you might not get direct insights on it, but I think kind of highlighting those issues to your stakeholders and being really clear about what does this actually mean. So, you know, like if someone was saying to me, why is Siri always female? Siri's always female. Like, and you know, and because I think this thing, we're really aware of those things, but I think for some of those senior stakeholders, we just don't.
The most obvious one is the gender one, but there's a lot of ones we don't call to the front of our head all the time. So people with accessibility issues, for instance, we don't always think of them in mind when we're designing, and that's something that's a challenge to get decision makers to think about. So I was just wondering, for you guys, it is just making sure you have a diverse range of user testing.
Diversity in user testing for sure. I was just thinking of that example where is it like getting soap out of the container, and the guy, so if you put like a person's like light coloured hand under this soap dispenser, it works, but if someone with darker skin, it doesn't work. And so they get like a white tissue and then put it on and go, oh, now it works. So I guess it's diversity and usability testing, right? Because then you're going to uncover those issues. And yeah, I mean, working with some of the government agencies, it can be really challenging to have like a really broad diversity and lots of people with different disabilities and things like that. But the more diverse the people you're testing with, the more likely you're going to come and actually discover that issue.
Yeah, and if you've got opinions from users, we find that often helps with making that
The
argument to
stakeholder.
stakeholders.
Yeah.
Kind of
The
coming
direct-
back to the multidisciplinary collaboration, you could kind of bring stakeholders into that and make sure they're part of the process, and maybe not collaborating every day, but kind of chatting to technologists and people working with this and understanding those issues, bringing them on that journey. I think part of that could be making sure they see that user feedback and going, oh, these are the things we need to consider. We could be alienating part of our user base and our community.
And then what that means from a business perspective.
Any questions?
Yeah.
With the expectations, when do
It's going to find an expectation.
Should be there in a minute. Oh, it's a long presentation, wasn't it? Okay.
I feel like digital providers will charge you when you're at the top. Is that true?
As in, things are more expensive at that point?
Yeah. Because when your expectations are high, that's when they give you the check.
Oh, so you mean like if people with like VR, then it seems like it costs a lot? I reckon that's actually probably more around the fact that, so if you're coming to a company and they've never worked in that space before, their tech team are probably looking at the estimates going, okay, we're going to need to actually do some research and really understand how to build for this. So then the time it takes to solve those problems is probably a lot longer.
Yeah.
That would be my, that would be my
Because
hunch.
as a sales technique, of course you do that, right? Get the expectations really high, get them to pay for it, and then why do we spend all the time?
Yeah, I think some of it, there could be an element of supply and demand as well. At that point, everyone, like in 2018 when this was done, virtual assistants, just over the top there, but everyone wants a virtual assistant. So anyone that can build them, anyone who can provide that tech is busy building them. There's a lot of demand. So they can charge a lot. People who are building augmented reality, they're kind of twiddling their thumbs, no one wants it anymore, and they're kind of going, oh, okay, maybe we should offer this a bit cheaper. So maybe part of that, but
Work itself out in the end.
hopefully.
It would be interesting to map the curve of like acquisition of the product like over that graph to see like, where do the early adopters come in and where do the, late
Totally.
adopters.
Yeah, you'd see Apple towards the end. They're not those kind of people who do something first. They wait till everyone else has kind of explored it and then bring it in. Yeah, really interesting. Okay.
What's kind of your approach between the gap between a real human and then what the technology can do? Often called the Candy Valley kind of situation. And a lot of people want the ANZ thing, which just shows you their product's a bit shit because everyone just has a lot of FAQ questions. Maybe they should fix the product, but that's kind of one end of the spectrum where you try and make it look like you are talking to a person, but you're not Westworld, you're not her, you're not whatever. And then the totally other end of the spectrum is Google, which seems to be doing it most elegantly, where they don't try and pretend there's a little person stuck in the bottom of your email. They just give you
looks
some
like you're writing
yeah, and you sort of avoid the situation where now they look like a woman and now they look like a man. They're just trying to concept. So what do you recommend at this stage of the technology to deal with the uncanny valley situation?
Good question. I think coming back to I think it's really hard. It depends on the use case. But I guess coming back to this approach and the human-centered design aspect, the answer to questions like that is test with users. See if you can fake something before you've paid for a digital human from Soul Machine. See if you can fake it. See what users think. See if they prefer actually just some suggested replies, or if they prefer someone who pops up and goes, "Hey, I can help you with that email." See what they think. I think it depends on the context. Like if I'm in my email, achieve something quickly, little buttons, shortcuts, recommendations like the writing app, far more useful. If I'm in, I think there's a BMW putting a Soul Machines character in a car as somebody you kind of talk to control the kind of entertainment system while you're driving. Maybe that'd be a bit different. I'm not sure. I think I lean towards the functional rather than human approach.
Yeah, I definitely like the seamless examples because I think ever since like Matt pointed out to me that where Google's making those suggested routes, and you kind of go, oh yeah, that is like an intelligence. It's saying, here are 3 suggested ways, and you build trust with the system. But the fact that it's kind of just, it's not this like weird interface trying to negotiate with my life. It's just integrated seamlessly within the things that I already use. It seems much more elegant, I think, as a solution. But totally agree with Matt. You just don't know until you test it. And there's some really powerful CMS systems out there now. Like there's one called Cycle where it's gathering data about you to build like a profile, and so effectively, as you browse through the website, it's already figured out where you live, what you do, what you're interested in, and all this information, and then how they go about presenting that. Like if they pre-populated an entire form with your address and everything, it would just be really creepy. Just like, oh my God, how do you know that about me? So that usability testing just becomes so important about how you're going to actually use that. Because like you say, it's amazing how quickly it becomes creepy.
Yeah, it's helpful and then freaking me the fuck out.
They're very close.
Hold on a minute, why do you know this? Yeah. Well, I've also heard people say like, oh, I was talking to a friend about, buying this new thing, and then suddenly it's being advertised to me on Facebook. Oh, how did that happen? It's you just,
I think that's a really good example because that could be that Facebook's listening to you because you've got your microphone settings on.
Oh, good.
Or is it just because you looked at a similar product a week ago and you're in the demographic that would typically buy that? Yeah. If they said you're seeing this ad because you bought this, that would kind of demystify it. But if they don't, then you're kind of left wondering and they're not kind of building that trust.
Facebook's stalking me.
Cool. Just remind, it's on moving technologies thing right a few years ago, but it was the whole like apps for a big thing. Every company was like, I need an app for this company.
Yeah.
Need an app.
Definitely.
Yeah, how do you guys, what's your advice when you get like a client or stakeholder who's like, we need AI, we need it because everyone else is doing it, or we need a chatbot because everyone else is doing it?
It comes back to that define motivation slide. It's kind of going, okay,
why?
You want a chatbot because it's cool to have chatbots these days. And that's fine. Let's play to the strengths of you trying to look cool and innovative and modern and doing things that your competitors aren't because they're stuck in the old days. Let's play to that strength and actually find the right problem for the chatbot or the AI or the app rather than just going, we'll build you an app with your website content because it's easy. Let's build you an app that suits people when they're out and about and need something quick on their phone rather than trying to replicate everything from your website. I think that's less emerging these days, but it's a good example of let's think about what's good for an app and build those strengths and deliver you the app you want, but actually solve a good problem rather than solving the easy problem.
Yeah.
Does that answer?
Yeah. That's why we came up with those 2 motivations, because we realised that people definitely have that motivation, right? They just want to experiment with a new technology. I just want to make something in VR, but why? Just because it's cool.
I've got some budget and I told my boss VR.
And we've got this like innovation board, so we need to present it to the innovation board. And you're going, cool. But so then the best thing is then, okay, cool. All right, in this context, there must be a reason for someone to want to use it. And sometimes, you can go out there and do research and actually find that there is really no legitimate reason to build this thing. And then you'd be really honest about that. Say, hey, we've just created a really fancy chatbot for our FAQ panel. It's not really going to help, but it looks cool.
Springload within Wellington, New Zealand, I guess, well known for tech. So you're getting quite a few people coming to you for that, let's just say, for the motivations there for, I don't know, something. And the second part of that question might be, when you go through some of these approaches, especially the ones where you come up with a problem, do you come up with sometimes low tech to no tech solutions?
Low tech to low tech.
So not using technology as a solution?
Yeah, definitely. I think yeah, sometimes when you're, like if you start with a human-centered design process and you actually do some experiments with the service, sometimes the solution is actually not tech. So I spoke about the health promotion agency, and we actually went out and spoke to Māori men from age 45 to 65 who drink heavily, and we found that they don't want technology. They don't want an app. They barely use their phone. They have got old school phones, and so this idea of reaching this audience through technology just didn't make sense. They actually really loved the workshop we made and some of the games that we had. So we made this model called Wharitapa Whā, which is about like thinking about your spiritual well-being. And they ended up using our workshop tools and like literally handing these out into the community as opposed to making a digital product. So we just made, and that's what we made. And but yeah, you just have to listen, and sometimes you have to be honest and say, actually, technology is not here to solve this problem. We don't need it, and that's okay. But yeah. They come to us, we're a tech company, sometimes it's not a tech solution.
It means I get the day off.
Yeah, back and go home early. Yeah.
How do you actually get engagement from those users during the initial kind of testing and research phases?
How do we recruit people?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, good question. It depends on the client. So we often recruit actually using a company called ConsumerLink. So they've got like a really broad range of users. So we'll put together a recruitment brief, and the recruitment brief outlines so things like we were talking about before around having a broad range of disabilities, broad range of ethnic backgrounds. And then we basically use that company to go out and find people. But it really does depend on the client. So we're doing some research with teachers for the Ministry of Education. And we're talking to teachers all across New Zealand, and the Ministry of Education just helped us to find schools to go and talk to. But yeah, the thing with recruitment, it's all about how you make a really diverse set of users so that you can get a nice cross-functional opinion. Yeah. Yeah.
The human-centered design is always really like a long process to find out the good thinking. How your clients are aware of it? Are they okay that the process is longer than they expected? Or sometimes, yeah, you have to tell them that, sorry, it will not be social, will not be tomorrow or next week because we need to test it and we need to.
Yeah, definitely. I think, some clients come to us and that's the way that they already want to approach the project. They know that human-centered design is the best way. And some clients, I literally read through the proposal and I'm going, they haven't spoken about their users at all. And so my heart broke that. And then it's basically sitting down and talking through and explaining why and the benefits and things like that. We just show lots of examples of, like I think the last slide I was talking to around building products that actually are really sophisticated, but they don't help anybody. But yeah, and I think in terms of the duration, there's actually ways of doing UX that's really quick. So that the prototype that we made in a week for ACC, so we did full human-centered design process in a week, and we built a thing. So you can actually do it super lean as well, and this, I think it's just about sizing. Like you can do big research projects or you can do really quick, lean things. But the fact that we still spoke to people and we found those really cool insights meant that we made a better product overall. So you just scale the approach depending on their appetite for it. Yeah.
Those were some really great questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
You may yourself more drinks and snacks if you'd like them. We'll be here for any more questions you've got, or thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Is there a thanks slide at the end?
There's a thanks slide all the way at the end. Keep going.